The sun was sinking low over the mesas, painting the desert in colors too fierce to name. Red, gold, a kind of dying orange that bled into the horizon. Abel Harkin rode through it like a man moving through the bones of his own past. Dust in his beard, grief in his eyes, and a little girl clutching his coat from the saddle behind him. JC didn't speak much anymore. She just watched. The land had taken that from her, the chatter, the laughter, back when the storm came and burned their ranch to cinders. She was only 6, but she carried silence like a grown woman carries loss. "Almost there," Abel said, though he wasn't sure he believed it. He'd spent his last dollars buying back the land that had broken him. The bank called it worthless, but to him, it was the last place Lila had breathed. Her grave still sat under the cottonwood by the dry creek bed. That was reason enough. The road narrowed into the old trail leading up to the ranch. The air smelled of dust and juniper. The house came into view, a blackened shape against the twilight. Sagging porch, roof half gone, windows empty as eye sockets. Then Abel saw it, a thin line of smoke curling from the chimney. He pulled the reins hard. The horse snorted, stamping the cracked ground. "Papa?" JC's voice was small, uncertain. Abel narrowed his eyes. The chimney smoke was real, steady, gray, curling like a ghost's breath. "No one should be there," he muttered. He swung off the saddle, boots hitting the dirt with a dull thud. "Stay on the horse, honey." "But, Dadder, just for a minute." He checked the rifle slung across his back, thumb brushing the worn wood stock. The desert had taught him one thing. Mercy was good, but preparedness kept you breathing. The front steps creaked under his weight. The door hung half off its hinges. Inside, light flickered, a fire burning where no fire had a right to be. He pushed the door open. 2 figures froze by the hearth. They were young, thin to the bone, their faces smeared with soot and fear. Hair black as obsidian, braided the same way. Twins, both Apache. One held a rusted knife, shaking. The other moved in front of her, like a wolf shielding her mate. Abel didn't raise his rifle. He just stood there, the wind outside whistling through the holes in the wall. "I don't want trouble," he said evenly, "but this land's mine." The one with the knife swallowed hard. Her English came halting but sharp. "We didn't know. We needed warmth." The other spoke quicker, more desperate. "Please, don't tell soldiers. We leave. Tonight." Abel studied them. Their clothes were torn rawhide and faded calico, stitched with turquoise beads now dulled by dust. Their feet were bleeding. They looked half-starved. Behind him a whisper, "Papa?" JC had slipped from the horse and stood in the doorway, clutching her rag doll. The firelight caught her curls, turning them copper. The twins stiffened. Abel's heart lurched. "Back outside," he ordered gently. "But Papa, it smells like Mama's fire." He hesitated. The words struck something deep. The women looked from the girl to the man, then to the fire. The silence stretched long enough for the wood to crack. Abel lowered his rifle slowly. "If you meant harm," he said, voice rough from disuse, "you'd have done it already." He nodded toward the ground near the fire. "Sit. Let's start with names." The knife trembled once, then lowered. "I am Nita," the first said, her voice low, melodic. "This is my sister, Tala." "Abel Harkin," he replied. "And that's my little one, JC." JC gave a shy wave. "Hi." The smallest smile ghosted across Nita's lips. Outside, the wind shifted. The smoke rose steady into the purple sky, carrying with it something fragile and new, a chance neither side had expected. Abel stood by the doorway, watching the sisters settle beside the flames. His gut told him he should send them away before the sheriff caught wind. But another part, the part that still whispered Lila's prayers at night, told him to let them stay. He didn't know it yet, but that single act of mercy would change the course of all their lives. And in the desert silence, the Red Mesa watched, as if the land itself was holding its breath. The fire burned low by the time the silence broke. Outside, the coyotes cried across the canyon, their calls echoing like ghosts through the desert night. Abel sat with his back to the wall, rifle resting across his knees, eyes on the 2 Apache women. They didn't sleep. They sat close to the fire, whispering in their tongue, soft, rhythmic, like a prayer carried on the wind. The taller one, Nita, met his eyes only once, and it was the kind of look that carried years of running. The other, Tala, kept her hand hidden under a blanket. Abel was sure the knife was still there. JC had fallen asleep near him, curled up in Lila's old quilt. Abel brushed a hand over her hair, wondering if he'd made a mistake bringing his child into this desert of ghosts and second chances. He cleared his throat. "You said your name's Nita, that right?" Nita's voice was soft but steady. "Yes. My people, the Red Mesa clan." She hesitated as if speaking the name hurt. "The soldiers came last winter, burned our homes, took whoever they could. They called it relocation." Abel nodded slowly. He'd heard the stories. Everyone in the territory had. How the army rounded up the Apache and marched them to Fort Bowie. How half never made it. "We escaped," Nita said. "They chained us in wagons. We broke free when the storm came. My sister and I ran into the hills. We lived in barns, caves, ate roots, drank rain when it came." Tala's voice cut in, sharper. "We hurt no one, but they hunt us like wolves." Abel looked at the fire. "You chose a bad place to hide. The law here don't like strangers much." Tala's eyes flashed. "The law don't like us anywhere." The words hung there, heavy and true. Abel thought about it for a long moment. He'd once believed the law meant fairness, until the bank took his land the week after Lila's funeral. Since then, he'd stopped believing in much of anything. He should have told them to leave right then. Should have sent them down the trail toward the canyon before daylight. But something about the way Nita kept glancing at her sister, protective, desperate, made his stomach twist. He reached for his coffee cup, found it empty, and sighed. "I'll think on what to do come morning." That's when JC stirred. Her curls stuck out in every direction, her voice groggy. "Papa, you talking to the fire again?" Abel gave a tired half smile. "Not this time." JC rubbed her eyes, then noticed the women. She blinked, then reached into the small cloth bag she carried everywhere. Lila's old sewing kit stuffed with scraps and crumbs. She pulled out a chunk of cornbread, hard and crumbling, and walked toward the fire. "Here," she said, holding it out to Nita. "Mama said hungry folks don't need rules. They need supper." The twins froze. Tala's hand twitched toward her hidden knife, but Nita's face softened, almost breaking. She accepted the bread carefully, like it was sacred. "Thank you," she whispered. JC just smiled. "You can sit by us if you want. The fire's warmer on this side." Abel's throat tightened. Lila used to say the same thing to strangers who passed through. He looked at his daughter, then at Nita, how she held that piece of bread like a promise, and something inside him gave way. "One night," he said quietly. "You can stay the night. Come morning, you move on." Nita bowed her head in silent gratitude. Tala's eyes stayed hard, but she said nothing. Abel leaned back, staring into the fire, wondering what his wife would have thought of this. Two fugitives sleeping in her home, their shadows dancing on the walls she once painted with her own hands. Maybe she would have said what JC said. Hungry folks don't need rules. When dawn came, the desert light crept through the cracks in the roof, painting gold streaks across the floor. Abel rose quietly, expecting to find the women gone. Instead, the scent of wood smoke and fresh-cut pine filled the air. Outside, Nita stood by the chopping block, swinging the axe with surprising precision. Tala was crouched by the corral, repairing a section of broken fence with strips of wire she'd scavenged. JC sat nearby, humming, feeding the horse handfuls of oats. Abel stepped onto the porch and watched for a long while. He didn't say a word. He just stood there, feeling something he hadn't felt in a long time, a slow, quiet stirring of life. They hadn't left, and somehow he realized he didn't want them to. The desert didn't change fast, and neither did Abel Harkin. But when he stepped out onto the porch that morning and saw Nita splitting wood while Tala mended the corral rail with a strand of rusted wire, something in him shifted. The ranch hadn't seen this much life in years. They'd said nothing about staying, they just did. Abel watched them for a long while, the air sharp and clean after the night's chill. Nita worked with quiet rhythm, her braids swinging over her shoulder, her eyes narrowed against the wind. Tala's movements were quick, precise, like she'd been fixing fences her whole life. JC sat near the porch steps, tossing pebbles at a line of ants and humming the tune Nita had taught her the night before. It was soft, low, an Apache lullaby that sounded more like a prayer than a song. Abel cleared his throat. "You two plan on rebuilding the whole place, or just the front yard?" Tala straightened, pushing hair from her face. "We owe you for fire and bread. We work, then leave." "Work's one thing," Abel said, stepping off the porch. "Rebuilding, that's another. Takes more than a day's labor." Nita looked at him, eyes steady but unreadable. You want us gone? He hesitated, the wind tugging at his hat brim. Didn't say that. Just, we can't keep tripping over each other, pretending it ain't what it is. He nodded toward the half-collapsed barn. This place needs more than my 2 hands. You want to stay? You pull your weight. Fair deal? The sisters exchanged a look. One of those silent conversations twins seem to have without words. Tala finally muttered, You'd let us stay? Even knowing who we are? Abel shrugged. Ain't my business who you were. I care what you do now. He handed Tala his old hammer, the handle wrapped in worn leather. To Nita, he offered a bundle of tools, spade, saw, and a coil of rope. I'll get the forge going by sundown. After that, we'll see what this land's still got left in her. They fell into rhythm faster than Abel expected. Nita knew the soil like a friend. She could tell where it held water by the color of the dust, where to dig for wild onions, which herbs would heal a wound or calm a fever. Tala fixed what others would have thrown away. Doors that hung crooked, a wagon wheel split clean through. JC trailed after them everywhere, a bundle of questions and laughter. What's this mean? She'd ask, pointing to the way Nita pressed her fingers to her chest before eating. It means thank you, Nita told her, in my people's way. Then JC would grin and try the word herself, stumbling over the Apache sounds until all 3 of them laughed. By late afternoon, the old place began to look less like a ruin and more like something breathing again. Smoke rose from the forge. The chicken coop stood straight for the first time in years. Abel leaned against the fence post, sweat streaking his face, watching the women work with quiet admiration he'd never say aloud. That night, they all ate together, beans, cornbread, and a bit of salted beef. The coyotes sang out beyond the hills, their cries blending with the steady pop of the fire. JC fell asleep beside Nita, head resting in her lap. Tala sat apart, her knife glinting in her hand as she sharpened it on a flat stone. Her voice broke the stillness. You know they'll come. Soldiers, men from town. They kill what they fear. Abel didn't flinch. He stared into the flames, voice even. They already took everything that mattered. Let 'em try again. Nita's eyes lifted from the child sleeping against her skirt. You would risk your life for us? Abel looked at her, his expression unreadable. Ain't about risk. It's about what's right. The firelight caught his face then. The lines of a man who'd lost too much, still standing anyway. For the first time since Lila's death, the house didn't feel empty. The air carried warmth, the kind that didn't just come from fire. By the next morning, when the first light spilled over Red Mesa, it wasn't just the land waking up. It was all 4 of them, each with their scars, their secrets, and a reason to keep fighting. Under one broken roof, something fragile had begun to grow. Not quite trust, not yet peace, but close enough to feel real. And in a land where everything was borrowed or burned, that was enough to start again. The nights at Red Mesa had their own kind of silence. It wasn't empty. It breathed, carrying the sound of the wind across the sage, the call of a far coyote, and the soft crackle of firewood turning to ash. That's where Abel, Nita, and Tala sat most evenings, once the day's work was done, and JC had drifted off to sleep beside the hearth. The ranch was beginning to live again, but the people in it were still learning how. Nita sat closest to the fire, her face lit by the orange glow, her eyes reflecting both warmth and distance. She held a small piece of carved wood in her hands, a charm maybe, or a memory. Tala sharpened her knife, always listening, always half-turned toward the door. Abel leaned back in his chair, pipe unlit, watching the sparks float upward into the black. After a long while, Nita spoke. When they came, she began softly. The soldiers, they came before sunrise. We thought it was thunder. Tala's hand stilled. Nita's voice didn't waver, but it carried a kind of tiredness that was deeper than age. Our mother, she tried to get the children into the rocks, but the fire spread fast, smoke everywhere. We could not find her. When it was over, there was nothing left standing. Tala's jaw clenched. I found her by the stream, she said, her voice flat. Buried her with my hands, no shovel, just dirt and tears. The wind moved through the cracks in the walls, filling the space between their words. Abel stared into the flames, his hands tightening on his knees. I'm sorry, he said finally. Nita looked up. You have lost too. It wasn't a question. Abel nodded once. My wife, Lila, fever took her 3 winters ago. Nothing the doc could do. She went quiet one night, just stopped breathing. I buried her myself under the cottonwood behind the old ranch. Nita's eyes softened. The one near the dry creek? He nodded again. Used to bloom white every spring. She liked to sit under it when the petals fell. Said it looked like snow without the cold. They sat without speaking for a while, each seeing something in the fire the others couldn't. When Abel finally looked up, Nita was watching him. Not pitying, just seeing him. The kind of look a person gives when they recognize their own pain in someone else. Later that night, as JC stirred in her sleep, she murmured something in her small, sleepy voice. Nita leaned down and hummed, a slow, haunting tune that rolled like water over stones. The sound was old, older than English, older than the fences that cut the land apart. "What's that song?" Abel asked quietly. "A song my mother sang," Nita replied, "for calling the spirit back to life when the world has forgotten it." Abel said nothing, but that night he dreamed of Lila standing under the cottonwood, smiling, and for the first time in years the dream didn't leave him hollow. Days stretched into weeks. The rhythm of the ranch became something steady, almost peaceful. Abel worked the corral while Tala repaired tack and checked the herd. Nita tended to the garden and to JC, teaching her words that rolled soft and strange from her tongue. Ashki for boy, Asadzan for woman, Shiaji for little one. Sometimes Abel would stop and listen from a distance, pretending to be busy with the fence line. He could hear JC's laughter mixing with Nita's gentle voice. It was a sound that made the dry land seem less cruel. One morning, Abel found JC kneeling by the broken fence, humming that same Apache song as she worked to fit a new post. Her small hands were covered in dirt, her curls stuck to her forehead. The melody drifted through the air, low, trembling, but full of light. Abel stopped in his tracks. The sound hit him in the chest like a hammer wrapped in silk. For a moment, he couldn't breathe. That tune didn't belong to his world. It belonged to loss, to prayers said in another tongue, to ghosts he'd never dared speak to. "That song don't belong to me," he muttered almost to himself. Nita looked up from where she was weeding near the garden, her face calm, her eyes catching the morning light. "It does now," she said. Abel turned away, swallowing hard. He didn't know what he felt, shame, gratitude, maybe both. But as he looked over the land, the mended fence, the smoke rising from the chimney, JC's laughter still floating in the wind, he realized something had shifted again. The ranch wasn't just rebuilding its walls, it was rebuilding him. And the echoes of what they'd lost had found new ground to grow in. Spring came to Red Mesa like a slow breath, returning to tired lungs. The desert woke in color, soft greens pushing through dust, the air rich with mesquite bloom and rain that never quite fell, but always threatened to. Each morning, the wind carried the smell of fresh-cut pine from the barn. Abel Harkin swung his hammer steady and sure, sweat running down the back of his neck, his voice gravelly as he called out to Nita. "Hold it firm. There. Good. Now slide that beam in place." Nita pushed with both hands, the muscles in her arms trembling but steady. Her dark hair was tied back, her cheeks streaked with sawdust. "It's heavier than it looks." "Most things worth keeping are," Abel said, driving another nail in. She smiled, small, rare, but real. Tala was out by the ridge, checking the traps they'd set for coyotes. She moved like a shadow, all instinct and purpose. When she returned, she dropped a tuft of fur near Abel's boots. "They're getting bold again," she said. He knelt to inspect it. "You track 'em better than any man I ever hired." Her brow arched, sharp as her tone. "I don't track for men." Abel's grin came slow. "Then you're doing it for the cattle. They're the only ones who'll thank you honest." Tala snorted, but she didn't hide the ghost of a smirk as she turned back toward the hills. By midday, the four of them worked like they'd done it for years. Abel and Nita fixing the roof, Tala reinforcing the corral, and little JC digging near the well with a small tin cup. She hummed one of Nita's songs as she worked, the tune weaving through the sound of hammering and wind. When Abel finally asked what she was doing, she looked up, dirt streaking her nose. "Planting seeds," she said. "What kind?" "The kind that grow tall, for Mama." Abel swallowed, his throat tight. The breeze carried the scent of mesquite and soil. He crouched down beside her and placed his rough hand over hers. "She'd like that, sweetheart." Nita watched from the porch, something soft flickering in her eyes. She'd seen grief eat people alive before. turned them mean or hollow. But Abel's pain was quiet, worn into him like an old scar. There, but no longer bleeding. As the sun dropped low, they ate supper on the porch. Beans, biscuits, and wild greens Nita had gathered near the wash. The talk was light, the laughter awkward at first but genuine. Even Tala cracked a smile when JC tried to imitate Abel's gruff voice. "Hand me that hammer, Missy." Abel laughed then, really laughed, for the first time in months. The sound startled him almost as much as it did the others. Later that night, with the stars thick above the mesa, Tala came riding fast out of the dark, her horse lathered and wild-eyed. She dismounted before the animal even stopped. "Found him in a gulch," she said, motioning to a smaller shape behind her. It was a wild colt, barely grown, its flank torn by barbed wire, one leg trembling. Abel grabbed a lantern and knelt beside it. "Easy now, boy," he murmured. His hands were firm but gentle, checking the wound. "You did right bringing him in." Tala folded her arms, watching every move. "He's wild, might not make it." Abel looked up. "Maybe, but we don't quit on something that still breathes." Together they worked through the night. Abel stitched the wound while Tala held the colt's head, whispering words in Apache that Abel didn't understand, but somehow knew were kind. Nita appeared with a bowl of warm herbs, crushing leaves between her palms. "This will keep the fever away," she said. JC watched from the doorway, her eyes wide with wonder. By dawn the horse stood, weak but steady, breath fogging in the cold morning air. Tala brushed its neck and glanced at Abel. "He's got fight," she said quietly. "So do you," Abel answered. She didn't reply, but when she left, she did something she hadn't done before. She nodded once, slow and deliberate. An unspoken truce. That morning, as the sun crept over the ridge, the ranch looked different. The roof stood straight. The corral held strong. Smoke rose from the chimney like a promise. Abel leaned against the fence, arms crossed, watching Nita hang laundry in the wind. She turned once, catching his gaze. For a heartbeat, neither looked away. The wind shifted, carrying the smell of cedar and soil, of new beginnings. For the first time since the fire that took everything, Abel felt the land breathe again. Maybe, he thought, forgiveness wasn't something you asked for. Maybe it was something you built, with your hands, your sweat, and a little bit of hope. The wind that morning carried dust, and something else. A tension that made the horses restless and the chickens go silent. Abel felt it before he saw it, the metallic jingle of bridles, the steady drum of hooves across dry earth. He stepped out from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag, just as 3 riders crested the ridge. The lead man wore a badge on his vest and a face that had forgotten kindness. Sheriff Clyde Barker, with 2 cavalry troopers trailing behind him. "Morning, Harkin," Barker called, his tone rough as gravel. "Heard you've been busy out here. Fixing up that old ranch?" Abel nodded, slow and measured. "Something like that." Barker dismounted, boots sinking into the dust. His eyes swept the yard, pausing on the barn, then the smoke rising from the chimney. "We're looking for 2 Apache women. Escaped from the Army transport last month. Heard they've been sighted near Red Mesa." Abel's stomach tightened. He kept his face blank. "Can't say I've seen anyone but myself and my little girl." Barker tilted his head, squinting. "Funny thing, some of the boys in town say you've had help. Folks don't rebuild a place like this alone." Abel met his gaze. "You calling me a liar, Sheriff?" The man smiled thinly. "Just saying this land's got eyes, and some of them still loyal to the law." The soldiers dismounted, moving toward the house. Abel's hand hovered near his revolver, but he didn't reach for it. He caught JC watching from the window, her small face pale and curious. "Mind if we take a look around?" Barker asked. Abel's voice was low. "You got a warrant?" Barker smirked. "Don't need one for runaways." Abel stepped closer. "This here's my land. You want to search it? You bring a piece of paper signed by a judge. Till then, you're just trespassing." For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Barker spat into the dirt and jerked his chin at the soldiers. "Mount up." He turned back to Abel as he swung into his saddle. "If I find out you're lying to me, I'll come back with more than words. You understand?" Abel nodded once. "Crystal." The riders kicked up dust as they left, their figures shrinking into the horizon. The ranch fell quiet again, but it wasn't peace. It was the kind of silence that comes before a storm. When the sound of hooves was gone, Tala emerged from behind the barn, her face hard as flint. The knife at her belt glinted in the sun. "You lied for us," she said. "Why?" Abel looked at her, sweat streaking his brow, jaw tight. Because I've been hunted too, he said evenly. Just wore a cleaner shirt when they did it. Tala's nostrils flared. You risked your life for nothing. Maybe, Abel replied, but I ain't about to let that bastard drag anyone else in chains. Not on my land. Tala stared at him a moment longer, then turned sharply and disappeared toward the ridge. Abel let out a slow breath and leaned against the porch post. Nita appeared beside him, quiet as the dusk that followed her. He'll come back, she said softly. I know. What will you do? Same thing I always do, Abel said, eyes on the horizon. Keep building, keep breathing, keep the people I care about safe. She hesitated. You shouldn't tie yourself to us. The law will call you a traitor. He gave a half smile that didn't reach his eyes. Law ain't the same as right, Nita. You should know that by now. That night, the desert held its breath. The fire crackled low, throwing long shadows across the room. Jacy slept near the hearth, her hand curled around her rag doll. Abel sat at the table, oil lamp flickering beside him. Nita moved quietly, refilling his cup with water. You don't owe me your safety, he said after a long silence. You owe me your truth. Nita stopped. Her fingers tightened around the cup. The soldier who tried to take my sister, she said at last. I killed him, with his own knife. That's why they chase us. Not because we ran, but because I made them bleed. Abel's face didn't change. He just nodded once. Then you did what you had to. Her voice trembled. You don't think it's a sin? He met her eyes, steady and unflinching. Ain't no sin in survival. For a moment, neither spoke. Outside, a coyote howled, long, lonely, defiant. Nita turned toward the sound, her breath unsteady. They'll never stop hunting us. Abel's voice was low, resolute. Then they'll have to learn the desert's got more than one kind of ghost. The fire popped, throwing sparks into the air. For the first time, Nita didn't flinch at the sound. Something unspoken bound them then. A shared defiance born of loss and mercy. Two souls marked by the law but redeemed by the simple, stubborn will to protect what still breathed. By summer, the ranch at Red Mesa no longer looked like a place meant for ghosts. The fences stood straight and strong, the corral held steady, and the well, once a cracked mouth of dust, ran clean and deep again. New grass pushed through the red earth, thin but stubborn, like hope learning how to live in dry soil. Abel Harkin worked from dawn until the stars came out, though the labor no longer felt like punishment. He had help now, real help. Nita kept the garden thriving, coaxing life out of dirt that had forgotten rain. Tala watched the ridges, bow and rifle in hand, keeping coyotes and drifters away. And Jacy, barefoot and sunburned, ran between them all like a small miracle that refused to stop laughing. There was peace, though no one dared to name it, not yet. Abel and Nita moved around each other with the quiet rhythm of two people learning a language they didn't share, but somehow understood. When she passed him a tool, their fingers brushed, light, electric. When he showed her how to tie a knot in the rope for the well bucket, she watched too long, his voice rumbling low beside her. Neither spoke of it. The air between them stayed gentle but charged, like the sky before a storm. Some nights when the others slept, Abel found himself standing by the window, looking out at the moonlight stretching over the land. He could see Nita's shadow by the barn, moving slow, checking the animals. Her hair caught the light, dark and soft as the desert night itself. He told himself not to feel what he felt. She was Apache. He was a man marked by loss and failure. The world wouldn't forgive them either way. But his heart didn't care much for what the world forgave. Tala noticed. Of course she did. She said nothing, only watched. Her sharp eyes caught the small things. The way Nita smiled at Abel's dry humor. The way he softened when he looked at her. Tala didn't interfere, but she stayed alert, ready to pull her sister away at the first sign of trouble. One afternoon, she found Abel mending the gate. My sister is kind, she said suddenly. Abel looked up, wiping sweat from his brow. I know. She don't always see danger till it's too close. He met her gaze evenly. I don't aim to be danger. Tala studied him, then gave a single nod. We'll see. And she walked off. Abel watched her go, knowing that was as close to approval as he'd ever get. Then came the night the desert finally broke. It started as a whisper, wind shifting, cool and heavy. The horizon flickered with lightning that didn't hit ground but promised it might. Nita stood in the doorway, barefoot, eyes lifted to the bruised sky. Rain, she whispered, almost in disbelief. Abel stepped beside her. The first drop hit his hat brim, then another on his hand. Warm, fat, and slow. He tilted his face upward, laughing under his breath. Didn't think I'd live to see mercy fall from the sky. Nita looked at him, her voice soft. Maybe mercy falls when men stop fearing it. The rain came harder then, steady, washing the dust from the porch, soaking the earth that had gone years without a drink. Lightning flashed. Thunder rolled like the heartbeat of something waking up. Abel's hand found hers without thought. Her skin was cool against his calloused palm. Neither pulled away. They stood there in silence, two weary souls under a sky that finally remembered how to forgive. When Nita looked up, her eyes shone, not with fear, but something quieter, deeper. Abel reached out, brushing a wet strand of hair from her cheek. The movement was slow, uncertain, but when she didn't flinch, he leaned closer. The kiss was hesitant, no hunger, no rush, just a meeting halfway between grief and grace. For both, it felt like breathing for the first time after years spent underwater. When they pulled apart, Nita's voice was barely a whisper. You carry too much sorrow, Abel Harkin. He smiled, faint and weary. Guess it took a woman of the desert to lighten it. Nita's laugh was soft, carried away by the wind. The rain kept falling, drumming on the roof and the earth, and for once, neither of them tried to stop it. Inside, JC stirred in her sleep, the corners of her mouth lifting as if she could feel the peace outside her window. Even Tala, from where she sat beneath the eaves sharpening her blade, glanced at the two figures on the porch and quietly looked away. The rain went on until morning, leaving the ranch smelling of wet cedar and new beginnings. By sunrise, the dry land around Red Mesa had begun to bloom. And so had they. By midsummer, the whispers were everywhere, from the trading post in Dry Hollow to the saloon in Fort Stanton. Folks said Abel Harkin was hiding Apache women on his land, that he'd gone soft, that the old rancher who once rode with the territorial militia was now harboring savages. It didn't take long for talk to turn to action. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon and the smell of rain still clung to the ground, JC spotted dust clouds on the trail. Riders, Papa, she said quietly, standing on the fence rail. Abel squinted. 5 men coming fast. The lead was Roy Cutter, a rancher with more whiskey than sense, followed by his friend Dusty Maris, and 3 others he didn't know but recognized the type. Men who needed a reason to shoot, not a cause. Get inside, Abel said, voice low but calm. Now! Tala appeared from the barn, bow already in her hand, eyes narrowing as she watched the riders close in. You knew this day would come, she said flatly. Reckon I did, Abel muttered, loading his rifle. The men pulled up in a line before the corral, spitting dust and arrogance. Cutter grinned through yellowed teeth. Evening, Harkin. Heard you've got yourself some unwanted company out here. Thought we'd help you clean up. Abel stepped forward, rifle in hand but barrel down. Ain't no company here but family, Cutter. Turn around and ride home. Dusty Maris laughed. Family, he says. That what you call 'em now? He nodded toward the house. Them 2 redskins got you bewitched? Abel's jaw tightened. Watch your mouth. Cutter dismounted, swaggering forward. Law says you're aiding fugitives. Law says we can take 'em in. Abel raised his rifle, steady. You ain't the law. The smile fell off Cutter's face. No, he said, pulling his revolver. But I don't need to be. The shot cracked the air like thunder. Abel fired back before the sound even faded, and chaos erupted. JC screamed from inside the house as glass shattered. Nita pulled her to the floor, covering the child's head with her arms. Tala loosed an arrow from the barn's shadow, hitting a rider clean in the chest. The man toppled backward into the dust, his gun going off as he fell. Abel ducked behind a trough, firing again. One of Cutter's men dropped. Another rode around the corral, trying to flank him. The horse screamed when Tala's second arrow hit the saddle girth, sending rider and beast crashing down. The fight was quick, brutal, loud. Then it was over. When the dust cleared, 2 men lay still. The others were gone, riding hard back toward town, Cutter clutching his bleeding arm. The smell of gunpowder and fear hung thick in the air. Abel staggered against the fence, clutching his side. Blood soaked through his shirt. Abel! Nita ran to him, her hands already red as she pressed against the wound. Stay still. I'm fine, he grunted, though the world spun. No, you're not. Her voice shook, breaking the calm she always carried. Don't die on me, Harkin. You gave us home. He tried to smile, teeth streaked with blood. "Ain't home if you ain't here." Tala appeared beside them, face smeared with dirt and sweat. "They'll bring more," she said. "The sheriff will come." Abel nodded weakly. "Let him." By the time Clyde Barker arrived the next morning with 6 deputies, the fire still smoldered in the corral, and the bodies had been buried. He rode up slow, jaw tight, surveying the mess. "What the hell happened here?" he demanded. Abel, pale and half sitting against the porch post, didn't bother to stand. "Justice came knocking early," he rasped. "Guess it didn't like the welcome." Barker's eyes flicked to Nita and Tala standing by the barn. "You should have turned them in. Could have saved yourself all this." Abel met his stare, voice gravelly. "I ain't the one needs saving." The sheriff cursed under his breath but didn't press. There was nothing he could prove, nothing he could fix. He gave a curt nod and rode off, dust rising behind him like the tail of a wounded animal. That night, the ranch was quiet again. Smoke drifted lazily from the blackened corral. The land smelled of iron and rain. Inside, Nita ground herbs into a paste, murmuring prayers in Apache as she pressed it to Abel's wound. The language was soft and low, like the hum of the earth itself. Tala sat nearby, knife still in hand, eyes on the window. JC slept beside Abel, small hand resting on his arm. Nita didn't stop whispering, not when his breathing slowed, not when tears filled her eyes. "Stay with us," she said, her voice barely a breath. "You belong here." Abel stirred, his voice weak but sure. "Long as you're here, I reckon I do." Outside, the desert exhaled, wind sweeping over the graves, over the burned fences, over the stubborn house that refused to fall. Weeks passed before Abel could stand straight again. The wound on his side healed slow, the kind that reminded a man every time he breathed that he'd been lucky to wake up at all. The ranch didn't look the same anymore. Smoke scars blackened the porch beams. The corral leaned where bullets had split its posts. And still, somehow it stood. Like everything else that had survived out here, it stood because it refused to fall. But Abel knew they couldn't stay. Word would spread. The law would come again, this time with orders and numbers that no rifle could stop. So one morning, before the sun had burned the mist off the canyon, he sold what cattle he had left to a passing trader. The coins he took felt heavier than they should have, like the last ties to a world he no longer trusted. By that evening, they packed what they could: a few tools, blankets, dried meat, seeds JC insisted on bringing for Mama's garden. They rode out under a red sky, the kind that looked like the desert itself was bleeding into the horizon. They made their new camp deep near the canyon's edge, a narrow valley hidden by red stone and sagebrush. There was water there, clean and cold, trickling through from the mountains. A cave nearby gave shelter. Days fell into rhythm again. They built a small lean-to, then a larger one. Nita tended to herbs that grew wild near the stream. JC collected feathers, her laughter echoing off the canyon walls. Tala ranged far and wide, bringing back meat, stories, and the kind of quiet reassurance that made a man sleep easier. Abel, for his part, kept his hands busy. He built a fire pit lined with smooth stones, repaired saddles, fixed broken arrows. Work had always been his language, his way of praying when he didn't have the words. And though they had no church, no town, no law to claim them, they lived like a family, bound by what they had chosen, not what they were born into. It was Tala who broke the silence one night as the fire burned low. "You're different," she said, staring into the flames. Abel looked up from the knife he was sharpening. "That's so. You don't talk like other white men. You don't look at us like they do." He thought about it, about all the lines that were supposed to divide them. "Maybe I just got tired of looking down at folks," he said. "World's mean enough without me adding to it." Tala's eyes flicked toward him, steady. "You protect us. You fight beside us. You bleed with us." Abel shrugged. "That's what family does." For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she nodded once and murmured, "Brother." The word caught him off guard. Not because it was strange, but because it felt right. A few weeks later, the army came back. They rode in from the north, uniforms flashing dull gold in the sunlight, searching for the fugitives they'd lost. But the homestead at Red Mesa was empty. The doors swung in the wind, the fields overgrown. On the barn door, carved deep into the wood, they found only one message: "Mercy built this house, leave it standing." The officer in charge stared at it for a long while, then spat in the dirt and rode on. The soldiers followed, their hoofbeats fading into the distance. At dawn, far from there, Abel and Nita stood at the edge of the canyon, looking out over the land spread wide beneath them. The sun rose slow, lighting the cliffs in red and gold. Nita's hand slipped into his, soft, small, but steady. His palm was rough, scarred, but he held her like he'd learned something sacred in the act. "Reckon the world ain't big enough for all its ghosts," Abel said quietly. Nita looked toward the rising sun. "Then we make a small one, just for ours." He turned to her, that familiar half-smile touching his lips. "Sounds about right." Behind them, the campfire crackled. Tala fetted another stick of wood without a word. JC chased a butterfly through the morning light, her laughter carrying over the canyon rim. The wind moved through the sage, cool and alive, like the breath of something ancient. And for the first time in years, Abel Harkin didn't feel like a man running from his past. He felt like part of the land again, part of something built not on fences or blood, but on mercy. Under the red sky, the desert looked almost gentle, almost forgiving. Years later, the land had changed, but not as much as the people who called it home. The canyon still caught the morning sun in its red walls, and the wind still sang through the sage, carrying whispers of things long gone. Yet down by the creek, where the earth was softer and green dared to grow, a small ranch stood proud against the wild. The house was simple, hand-hewn logs, patched roof, smoke curling from the chimney. Beside it, a garden bloomed with corn and beans and bright desert flowers that had learned somehow to share the same soil. A child's laughter broke the stillness. JC ran across the yard, braids flying, clutching a small wooden horse her father had carved from juniper. She made it gallop along the fence rail, kicking up dust, her voice full of sunlight. Abel Harkin watched from the porch, one knee propped, a mug of coffee in hand. His hair had silvered at the temples, but his shoulders were still broad, his eyes clear. Years of labor had left their mark, yet peace had softened the lines time once carved deep. Inside, Nita hummed a tune while grinding corn. Her voice floated through the open door, low and soothing, one of the old Apache songs, the kind that carried both prayer and memory. The scent of bread and wood smoke mingled with the air, wrapping the place in quiet warmth. Abel set down his cup and walked out toward the edge of the yard, where a circle of fresh dug earth surrounded a wooden frame. He wiped the sweat from his brow and studied the hole, deep, dark, waiting. The new well had taken weeks. Hard rock, stubborn clay. He'd almost given up twice. But something inside him, the same thing that once refused to let him die in a storm of bullets, kept him digging. Today he'd hit water. He worked the crank slowly, lowering the bucket into the cool dark. When he hauled it up, droplets spilled over the rim, catching the light like glass. He knelt, cupping his hands and let the water run over his skin. It was cold, clean, alive. He looked out across the land and whispered, "It ain't the land that's cursed. It's the men who forgot how to listen." Behind him, Nita stepped into the sunlight, wiping her hands on her apron. Her dark hair, now streaked with silver, framed a face that time had only deepened. Still beautiful, still strong. "Then let's remind it we're still here," she said softly. Abel smiled, slow and quiet. "Reckon that's the least we can do." He poured the water onto the ground, watching it sink into the thirsty earth. A few drops splashed on his boots, glinting in the morning sun like something sacred. From the ridge above, Tala watched. She'd changed too, older now, her hair tied with beads and eagle feathers, her face marked by wind and years. She had become a messenger between the tribes and the settlers, a voice that carried between two worlds that once refused to speak to each other. Every few months, she came riding down from the high country, bringing stories, laughter, and sometimes news of the Red Mesa clan rebuilding further south. She never stayed long, but the land seemed brighter when she did. That morning, she sat astride her horse, watching the family below. JC was chasing a butterfly near the well. Abel and Nita stood shoulder to shoulder, their hands clasped in the kind of silence that didn't need words. Tala smiled, small, proud, knowing. As noon came, the wind shifted. A storm gathered on the horizon, dark clouds rolling like slow thunder. But no one feared it. Abel stood with his hand still in Nita's. "Smells like rain," he said. She nodded. "The good kind." When the first drops fell, they didn't run for shelter. The rain came warm and clean, soaking the soil, darkening the wood of the porch, dripping from the eaves. JC laughed, spinning in circles, her little carved horse held high to the sky. Abel reached out, catching water in his hands again. It ran through his fingers, spilling back to the ground. Behind him, the creek overflowed its banks, spreading out over the meadow. Nita's voice rose above the rain, a soft hum at first, then a song, the same one she'd once sung by a dying fire when the world had felt like it was ending. Now it sounded like a beginning. Tala dismounted and walked down the ridge, her feet sinking into wet earth. Flowers had already begun to rise where the water touched. Tiny blooms of yellow and white, stubborn against the storm. Abel looked at them all, his wife, his daughter, the sister who had once pointed a knife at him, and felt something wordless settle in his chest. This was what they'd fought for, not land, not safety, belonging. The rain slowed. The light broke through the clouds, washing the desert gold. Water spilled over Abel's hands, glinting like silver. JC laughed. Tala stood still on the ridge, and Nita's hand found his again. All around them, the desert bloomed, and somewhere, far beneath the earth, the well that never ran dry kept whispering the same truth that had saved them all. Mercy lasts longer than memory.